I moved to Harlow Creek when I was 6 years old. My parents told me it was a fresh start. A small town. Safe streets. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew each other's names. What they didn't tell me, what they probably didn't know, was that something in that town had been waiting. Waiting long before we arrived. And once we settled in, it decided to stay close. Our house sat at the end of Mallow Road. A two-story colonial with white shutters and a deep front porch. The kind of house that looks warm in photographs. The neighbors on the left were the Hendersons, elderly couple, kept to themselves. On the right, the house had been empty for 2 years before we arrived. My mother mentioned this casually one evening, the way people mention things they've already made peace with. "It'll sell eventually," she said. "Someone will move in." Nobody ever did. For the first few months, I didn't think much about the empty house. I was 6. I was more concerned with finding friends, learning which streets were good for bikes, and figuring out the rules of the new school. But I noticed things. Small things. The kind of things a child notices and adults explain away. The curtains in the empty house moved sometimes. I'd be playing in the yard and I'd look over, and the curtain on the upper right window, the one that faced directly into my bedroom, would shift. Slowly. Like someone had just stepped back from the glass. I told my mother. She said it was air pressure, old houses breathe, it's nothing. I believed her. I was 6. By the time I was 8, I had stopped believing her. The sound started that summer. Low, rhythmic knocking that came from the wall shared between our house and the empty property. Always at night. Always between 11 and midnight. My father went over twice with a flashlight, checked the exterior, found nothing. "Raccoons," he said. "Old pipes. Settling foundation." The vocabulary of people who don't want to be scared. I'd lie in my bed and listen to those knocks and count them. 3. Then silence. 3. Then silence. It was too consistent for an animal. Too patient for a pipe. Whatever made that sound was doing it deliberately, and it knew exactly which wall was closest to where I slept. When I was 10, I saw him for the first time. I say him because of the shape. Tall. Broad in the shoulders. Standing in the side yard of the empty house at 2 in the morning. I'd gotten up for water and glanced out my window without thinking, the way you do half asleep. He was just standing there. Facing my window. Not moving. I couldn't see a face, the shadow was too heavy, but I could see the outline clearly against the pale lawn. I stood at my window for a long time, frozen. He didn't move. I finally backed away, got into bed, and pulled the covers up. I told myself it was a real person. A homeless man, maybe. A late-night walker. I told myself that for years, actually. It was easier. But the next morning there were no footprints in the soft dirt of the side yard. We'd had rain 2 days before. The ground was still soft enough to hold impressions. I checked. I was 10 years old and I checked, because even at 10 I understood what the absence of footprints meant. The years passed. We stayed. I don't know why my family never left, financial reasons, maybe, or the simple stubbornness of people who've unpacked their boxes and called somewhere home. The town itself was fine. Normal. Nothing happened to anyone else on Mallow Road, as far as I knew. Whatever was in that empty house, it wasn't interested in the whole street. It was interested in me. I know that sounds self-centered. I know how it sounds. But the evidence accumulated the way evidence does, slowly, undeniably, until you can't look away from it anymore. When I was 13, I started sleepwalking. My mother would find me in the morning standing at the back door, hand on the knob, facing the yard that bordered the empty property. I never remembered getting up. Never remembered walking downstairs. I'd just find myself there at dawn, cold and barefoot, with no explanation. The doctor said it was stress. Adolescence. She recommended a sleep study. My parents scheduled one and then forgot to follow through, the way busy parents do. The sleepwalking went on for 2 years. One night, I was 15, my mother caught me before I got to the door. She grabbed my arm, and I woke up instantly, that jarring, disorienting snap of sleepwalking interrupted. I was in the kitchen. It was 3 a.m. And through the kitchen window, in the yard next door, that shape was standing there. Same place it always stood. Same stillness. My mother saw it too. She didn't scream. She didn't say anything. She just tightened her grip on my arm and slowly walked me backward, away from the window. In the morning, she called a realtor about selling the house. We were gone within 4 months. But here's what I need to tell you. Here's the part that keeps me awake even now, 23 years after we first moved in. When we were packing, I went into the attic to bring down the last of the boxes. Tucked against the far wall, behind the water heater, a place I'd never been, a place I'd had no reason to go, I found something. A small wooden chair. Child-sized. Facing the attic window that looked directly at the empty house next door. The seat was worn smooth in the shape of something that had sat there. Sat there many times. The dust around it was disturbed in a perfect circle, like something had been pacing. We had never owned that chair. We asked the previous owners. They'd never owned it either. I left it there. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to know how long it had been sitting in that attic, looking out that window, watching the empty house. I moved 600 miles away after college and I have never driven through Harlow Creek again. But sometimes, in hotels, in unfamiliar cities, I wake up at 3 a.m. standing at the window. Hand on the glass. Looking at whatever is outside. The farmhouse had been in my wife's family for 3 generations. When her grandmother died and left it to us, everyone said we were lucky. Land values in that part of Pennsylvania were rising. The structure was solid. The bones were good, as people who flip houses like to say. We moved in on a Saturday in late October, and by the second night, I understood that the bones of that house remembered things the family had chosen to forget. My wife, Claire, grew up visiting the house every summer. She loved it without question, the way you love places that hold your childhood. She didn't notice anything unusual. I want to say that first, clearly, whatever happened in that house, she never experienced it the way I did. And I've never been able to fully explain that difference. It started with the sound. Not a dramatic sound. Not chains or screams or anything from a movie. Just a soft, irregular scratching beneath the floorboards in the hallway outside our bedroom. I heard it the first night and assumed mice. Old farmhouse, rural Pennsylvania, mice were expected. I mentioned it to Claire. She shrugged. She'd heard mice in that house her whole childhood. But mice have a pattern. They move in short bursts, stop, start again. They are erratic in the way small animals are erratic. This sound was different. It moved slowly. Deliberately. And it had direction. I could follow it as it traveled the length of the hallway, paused outside our door, then continued toward the stairs. Every night. Same time. Same path. I set traps. Caught nothing. I pulled up a short section of flooring with a contractor friend and we looked underneath. Clean joists, no droppings, no nests, no sign of anything living. My friend said it might be thermal expansion, old wood contracting as the temperature dropped at night. Plausible. I accepted it. The sound continued. By November I was sleeping badly. I'd lie in bed listening, tracking it through the dark. Claire slept fine, every night, deeply and peacefully, while I tracked that slow movement through the bones of her grandmother's house. I started keeping a log. Not because I thought it would prove anything, just because writing things down made me feel less like I was losing my mind. October 31st, sound begins 1:14 a.m., travels east to west, pauses 4 minutes at bedroom door. November 3rd, sound begins 1:09 a.m., same path, pause extended to 7 minutes. November 11th, sound begins 1:06 a.m. Pause at door lasted until 2:30 a.m. Did not continue to stairs. That last entry. That night changed things. I lay completely still for that entire hour and 20 minutes while whatever was under the floor simply rested outside our door. I could hear it shifting occasionally. Settling. Like something that had gotten comfortable. The air in the room felt different, thicker. I know how absurd that sounds, but the air felt like it had weight that night. I didn't sleep. I watched the door handle in the dark, irrationally certain it was about to turn. It didn't. Eventually the sound moved on. But I was already changed by then. I started researching the house in December. Property records, local history, whatever I could find. Claire's family had owned it since 1953, bought from an estate. Before that, a farming family named Kessler had lived there since 1901. Standard rural history, nothing alarming in the records. But I found a newspaper archive from 1948. A small item, buried in the local paper. A man named Gordon Kessler, age 71, had gone missing from the property. No explanation given. His family reported he'd been in declining health, confused, wandering at night. A search was conducted. He was never found. The article mentioned something in passing that I've never been able to shake. A neighbor interviewed for the piece said that in the weeks before he disappeared, Gordon had been found multiple times crouching in the hallway of his house in the early morning hours. When asked what he was doing, he always gave the same answer. He said he was listening to the thing underneath the floor. He said it was trying to find a way up. I didn't tell Claire. I've still never told Claire. The following February, we had a week of hard cold, temperatures dropping below zero at night. On the third night of that cold snap, I woke at 1 a.m. to silence. No sound. For the first time in months, complete silence in the hallway. I thought it was over. I lay there in the quiet and felt a relief so profound it was almost physical. Then the scratching started inside the bedroom wall. Not the hallway. Inside. 6 inches from where Claire's head rested on the pillow. Slow, deliberate, patient. The same sound, now on the other side of a single layer of plaster and lathe. I sat up. Claire slept on. The sound moved along the wall, from the head of the bed toward the window, and then stopped. In the morning I found 3 long marks on the interior baseboard near the window. Deep, parallel gouges in the old wood. Claire looked at them and said it was probably the house settling in the cold. I hired someone to inspect the crawlspace the following week. He was down there for 20 minutes before he came back up. He didn't say much, just gave me his report and left quickly, didn't make small talk the way contractors usually do. His written report noted the following in the section for unusual observations: extensive scratch marks on the underside of the subfloor throughout the hallway and master bedroom areas. Marks appeared consistent with something attempting to push up through the flooring from below. He recommended a pest inspection. No pest inspector we called would quote the job after seeing the crawlspace. 3 of them declined without explanation. We sold the farmhouse that spring. Claire was heartbroken. I told her it was the commute, the upkeep, the isolation. All true things. Not the true reason. I kept my logbook. I still have it. Sometimes I open it to that November entry. Pause at door lasted until 2:30 a.m. Did not continue to stairs, I used to wonder what it was waiting for that night. Why it stopped outside our door for so long without moving on. It took me years to understand. It wasn't waiting to get in. It was listening to us. The way we had been listening to it. Patient. Deliberate. Learning our sounds. My father was not a man who scared easily. He was a contractor, had been his whole life. Big hands, quiet voice, the kind of man who walked into a problem and worked through it without drama. He didn't believe in the supernatural. He believed in physics and labor and getting enough sleep. I never saw him frightened. Not once in my entire childhood. Which is why the last 2 years of his life were so hard to watch. We grew up in Millhaven, a small city in the rural Midwest. Our neighborhood was old, houses built in the 1910s and 1920s, deep yards, tall trees that blocked the light. Our house had been in the family since my grandfather built it in 1931. My father had grown up there, raised us there, planned to die there. He was 71 and still doing light contracting work when my mother passed. After that, he lived alone. I called him every Sunday. Visited every 2 months. He seemed fine at first, quiet, the way men of his generation handle grief, but functional. Sharp. He still drove, still kept the yard, still made his own meals. The first sign that something was wrong was so subtle I almost missed it. During one of our Sunday calls, he paused mid-sentence and said, "Hang on." I waited. 30 seconds. A full minute. "Dad?" "Someone's in the backyard," he said. I asked if I should call the police. He said no, it was probably nothing. When I asked what he saw, he took a long time to answer. "Just someone standing back by the tree line," he said. "It's dark. Hard to tell." I drove down the following weekend. He seemed fine, showed me around the house, made coffee. When I asked about the person in the yard he waved it off. "Kids cutting through, probably. Not a big deal." But when I walked through the house I noticed things. The curtains in the back rooms were all closed. He'd put a latch on the door to the basement, a simple sliding bolt, new. And on the kitchen table, covered by a newspaper like he didn't want me to see it, was a legal pad with a list of times written on it. 11:45, 2:20. 3:10, 1:55. 12:30. Always at night. Always between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. I asked him about it. He folded the newspaper over it and said he was just keeping track of his sleep schedule. My father had never kept a sleep schedule in his life. I didn't push it. Over the next 8 months, his calls changed. He stopped talking about his projects. Stopped mentioning his neighbors and their small dramas. Instead, he talked about the yard. About what stood in it. He never used the word ghost. He never said anything dramatic. He described it the way he described a structural problem in an old wall, matter-of-factly, with a quiet concern underneath. "It doesn't do anything," he told me once. "Just stands there. Same spot. Back by the old oak." I asked if it was human-shaped. He said yes. I asked if it moved. "Not while I'm watching," he said. He went to his doctor. No cognitive decline. Vision tested well. He wasn't on any medications with documented hallucinations as a side effect. The doctor, who'd known him 30 years, told him old houses could do strange things to old men alone in them and suggested he spend more time out of the house. My father had no reaction to that. He just nodded and came home. The fall of that year I got a call on a Wednesday night. It was my father, which was unusual, we'd always talked Sundays. His voice was different. "It was on the porch tonight," he said. I drove 3 hours in the dark. Arrived at midnight to find him sitting at the kitchen table with every light in the house on. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I'd never seen my father look like that. He told me he'd gone to lock the back door at dusk and seen it at the far end of the yard like always. When he looked up from the lock, it was at the porch railing. When he looked up from the porch railing, it was at the window. "Same shape," he said. "Just closer." I stayed that night and the next. I saw nothing. No shapes in the yard, no movement outside the windows. But I couldn't sleep. Not because I thought I'd see something. Because my father, a man made of concrete and silence, sat at the kitchen table both nights with his back to the wall, watching the doors. That was new. Whatever it was had changed him. He died 11 months later. Cardiac event, completely without warning. He was found at the kitchen table by the neighbor who checked on him. The lights were on. The back door was bolted. I went to clean out the house. I found the legal pad in the kitchen drawer. Pages and pages of times. Months of them. But the last page was different. In my father's careful handwriting, 2 notes. The first, closer every night. The second, written in harder strokes, underlined twice, stands behind me now when I look in the mirror. I stood in that kitchen for a long time. I thought about every Sunday call. Every visit. Every time I'd stood in the backyard and seen nothing. My father had been watching something approach for the better part of 2 years. Getting closer. Closing distance the way something does when it isn't rushing, when it knows it has time. And at the end, it was standing close enough to be in the mirror. I sold the house without going into the backyard. I didn't want to see the spot by the old oak. I didn't want to stand in that place and look back at the house and understand, from that angle, how good the view of the kitchen window really was. There's a road in the county I grew up in that locals call Hollow Pines. It's not on any map I've found. It runs for about 3 miles off Route 9, cutting through dense tree cover so thick the branches meet overhead and block out the sky. The locals know it exists. Nobody drives it after dark. When I was growing up, the adults in town had a way of mentioning it without explaining it, the way adults talk about things they've decided don't need discussing. I drove it once. I was 22, back home after my first year of college. I drove it alone, at night, because I was young and thought that made me brave. I have never done anything like that since. The road starts normally enough. Asphalt, faded lines, tree cover getting thicker as you go. My headlights hit the tree trunks in a way that made them look pale and close. After about a mile, I noticed the first thing, no animals. No eyes catching the light from the brush, no deer or raccoons or foxes. Nothing. The trees pressed close and the road went straight and everything outside the beam of my headlights was absolute black. At the 1.5 mile mark I slowed down without meaning to. My foot eased off the gas of its own accord. I noticed it after a moment and told myself to speed back up. But there was a feeling, and I'm going to try to describe this accurately, like pressure in the chest. Like standing at the edge of something high. My body understood something that my mind hadn't caught up to yet. That's when I saw the figure. Standing at the side of the road. Not in the road, not moving toward it, just standing there in the tree line with the darkness behind it. Human shape. Facing the road. Facing me as I drove past. I told myself it was a person. Some local out for a walk, which made no sense at 11 at night on a road that led nowhere, but I told myself that. I kept driving. The road curved slightly, then straightened. At the 2 mile mark, there was another figure. Same position. Same stillness. Standing in the tree line, watching the road. At 2.5 miles, there were 3 of them. Grouped together, slightly staggered, like they'd been standing there long enough to find their natural positions. I drove past at 40 miles an hour with my eyes straight ahead and my hands locked on the wheel. The road ends at a clearing. A flat, open space that might have been a farm field once, long gone to weeds and rock. There's nothing there, no structure, no sign, nothing to explain why the road goes there at all. I sat in that clearing with my engine running and my headlights aimed at the tree line and I thought about having to drive back out. I don't know how long I sat there. It didn't feel long. But when I looked at the clock it was 1:15 a.m. and I had left my house at 11:30. The drive-in should have taken 15 minutes. I turned around and drove back out. Fast. Watching the road. The figures were gone. All of them. The tree line was just trees, pale trunks, blank dark between them. I drove out to Route 9 and didn't stop until I was in the parking lot of a gas station 3 miles away, sitting under the fluorescent lights, breathing. I told a few people about it over the years. The reactions were consistent, not disbelief, but something more like careful acknowledgement. Like I'd confirmed something they'd rather not discuss. One older man at a diner, when I mentioned hollow pines, put his coffee down and looked at me directly. "How many did you see?" he asked. I told him 5. 2 singles and the group of 3. He nodded slowly. "That's about average," he said. I asked what he meant. He paid his check and left. I looked up local history. Couldn't find anything specific to that road. But I found a notation in a county historical archive from 1887 that referred to a corridor of observed visitations in the area matching the description of hollow pines. The notation was brief and administrative, like someone had documented it the way you document a road hazard. No explanation. No follow-up. Just the location. And a note at the bottom in faded ink that I almost missed. "Do not stop in the clearing." I stopped in the clearing for 45 minutes. I have no memory of those 45 minutes. I don't go looking for what happened during them. Some blanks are better left unfilled. The blackout started on a Tuesday in November. Our section of Benner Street lost power at 9 p.m. and it didn't come back for 11 days. The utility company blamed a substation fault. They were working on it. They were sorry for the inconvenience. What they couldn't explain, what nobody ever explained, was why the outage was so precisely limited. Our block. Not the next block over. Not the street behind us. Just Benner Street between numbers 400 and 580, 6 houses total, cut off from the grid for 11 days while the rest of the neighborhood had full power. I had candles and a battery lantern. My neighbor, Frank, had a generator he ran from 6 to 10 p.m. We were inconvenienced but functional. Adults handle things. What I was not prepared for was the dark. Real dark. The kind of dark you forget exists when you've spent your whole life in a city. Without the glow of streetlights, without the ambient bleed from other houses, our street became something prehistoric at night. I'd look out my front window and see absolutely nothing. Not shapes, not outlines. Nothing. The dark was complete. The first 3 nights, nothing unusual. Inconvenient, a little unsettling, but ordinary. By the 4th night I had adjusted enough that I started noticing sounds I'd never heard before, the actual texture of a quiet street, the minute creaks of my house, the distant traffic from the lit world beyond our block. I found myself lying in bed listening with a focus I'd never had before. That 4th night, I heard footsteps on my porch. Slow and deliberate. The porch boards have a specific creak pattern I know well, I'd lived there 6 years. I could tell from sound alone whether someone was walking to the door or standing still. These footsteps walked to the door. And then stopped. No knock. No doorbell. Just someone standing at my door in the complete dark at 2 a.m. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't speak, didn't leave. I finally turned on my battery lantern and carried it to the front door. I stood there with my hand on the knob. The footsteps were gone, I'd heard nothing after that initial stop, no retreat, no movement. I opened the door. The porch was empty. But the small mat outside my door had been turned over. It had been face up when I bought it. It was face down, pressed flat, like someone had stood on it long enough to flatten it that way. On the 5th night, Frank came over and said he'd seen someone in the street. standing in the middle of the road at the far end of the block, around the 400s, just past the edge of the outage. He'd seen it from his second-floor window with a flashlight. Human shape, standing still. He'd watched it for several minutes. Called out to it, he said. Nothing. Then I looked away for a second and it was gone. We compared notes over the next few days. The footsteps on my porch. His figure in the road. The Petersons at 512 reported that their dog had refused to go outside after dark beginning on the third night, would stand at the back door and whimper, but would not cross the threshold. The Millers at 490 mentioned that their motion sensor porch light, which ran on battery backup, was triggering every night between 2 and 4 a.m. despite showing no footage on the camera. Nothing was there. But the sensor said something was. On the 8th night I made a mistake. I'd been sitting up late, reading by lantern light, and I stepped onto my porch for air around midnight. The dark was total. I stood there letting my eyes adjust, which took longer than I expected, and in that adjustment period, that stretch of seconds when the dark is thickening into shapes, I became aware of something. There was someone at the edge of my porch. Not on the steps. On the porch. Close enough to touch if I reached out. I couldn't see anything. Nothing resolved out of the dark. But I knew with absolute certainty, the way you know something with your whole body, not your mind, that something was there. Standing right in front of me in the dark, separated from me by maybe 4 feet, not moving, not making a sound. I backed into the house and bolted the door. In the morning I checked the porch. The same mat, turned over again. And in the thin frost on the porch railing, it had been a cold night, a handprint. Fingers together, palm flat, like someone had steadied themselves against the railing. The frost around it undisturbed. The print was too large for any person I knew. And it was on the inside of the railing. Power came back on day 11. Lights blazed on at 6 a.m. The street looked completely ordinary in the sudden brightness. People went back to their routines. Nobody talked about the 11 days, the same way people don't like to talk about what the dark showed them. The mat I threw away. I never bought another one. The porch railing I replaced that spring, even though it didn't need it. I just didn't want the railing that hand had touched. Frank moved away the following year. He never said why. I still live on Benner Street. Some nights I lie in bed and I miss having power cut out. Because in the real dark, at least I knew something was there. Out there in the complete black, with nothing between us. Now all the lights are on. I can't see it anymore. But I know it didn't leave. My son Marcus was 7 when it started. He'd been waking up at night for about a year, nothing alarming, just the usual childhood nightmares, back to sleep in 20 minutes. We'd established a routine. He'd come to our door, I'd walk him back to his room, check the closet, check under the bed, leave the nightlight on. Standard parenting. It became so routine I could do it half asleep. One night in March I woke to the sound of him crying. Not at our door, down the hall, in his room. I got up and went to him, walked him through the routine, got him back to sleep. On the way back to my room, passing the bathroom, I glanced in. Marcus was standing at the bathroom mirror. I stopped. He was behind me, I'd just left him in his bed. I turned around. The hallway behind me was empty. His bedroom door was shut, as I'd left it. I looked back into the bathroom. The figure at the mirror was gone. I stood in the hallway for a long time. I finally opened Marcus's door. He was asleep, exactly as I'd left him, the nightlight casting its orange glow. The bathroom was empty. I was tired. I told myself I'd imagined it. The next week Marcus told me about his friend. He said it matter-of-factly, the way children discuss things they haven't yet learned to be secretive about. He had a friend who visited at night. The friend stood at the end of his bed and watched him sleep, and sometimes they talked, but the friend didn't use words, more like pictures in his head. He didn't know the friend's name. The friend didn't have one. I asked what the friend looked like. Marcus thought about it. Like me, he said. But older. And really quiet. My wife and I discussed it that night. Imaginary friends were normal. Children processed anxiety through invented companions. We agreed to monitor it and not dramatize it. 3 weeks later, I heard Marcus talking in his room at 2 a.m. Not unusual, he sometimes narrated to himself when half asleep. I stood outside his door and listened. He was asking questions, pausing, listening. One side of a conversation. I knocked softly and opened the door. He was alone. Sitting up in bed, blinking at me. "Were you talking to someone?" I asked. "My friend," he said. "He just left." I looked around the room. Checked the closet, the window, locked from inside. Nothing. "Which way did he go?" I asked, because I didn't know what else to say. Marcus pointed at the wall. The wall that faced the hallway. The wall with nothing on the other side of it but plaster and insulation. I started staying up. Not going into his room, just sitting in the hall in the dark, listening. Most nights, nothing. But on the second Saturday of April, I heard it. 2 voices. One was Marcus, clearly. Sleepy, slow, the half-conscious voice of a half-dreaming child. The other was barely audible, a low sound that didn't resolve into words I could identify, but had the rhythm of speech. Patient. Deliberate. Question and answer. I opened the door. Marcus was asleep. Completely asleep. His breathing was slow and even. The room was empty. But the air was cold. Not slightly cool. Cold, the way a room gets cold when something warm has just left it. I stood in the doorway and felt the cold on my face, and I understood, in a way I've never been able to fully articulate, that something had been in there seconds ago. Was gone now. But had been close enough to my sleeping son to have that quality of presence that changes the air. I moved his bed into our room the next night. Told him it was for a home project, repainting. He accepted it the way children accept things. The talking in the night stopped. For 2 weeks, nothing. I started to breathe easier. Then one night I got up for water and passed his old room, empty now, just the bare furniture we hadn't moved. The door was open. I glanced in. There was a shape on his bed. In the dark, in the empty room, lying in the exact position Marcus had always slept. Same size. Same stillness. I did not move toward it. I turned on the hallway light. The shape didn't react to the light. It stayed perfectly still. I stood at the doorway and looked at it for almost a minute. Then it sat up. I closed the door. I walked back to our room, got back into bed beside my wife and son, and did not sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning I opened the door. Empty room. Nothing on the bed. The window still locked from the inside. I have never told Marcus any of this. He's 16 now and remembers his nighttime friend only vaguely, the way children remember things that fade. He describes it as just a dream when it comes up. I don't correct him. His old room is a home office now. I work in it during the day, lights on, window open. At night I keep the door closed. I don't open that door at night. I don't check on it. I don't stand outside listening. Because once, just once, about a year ago, I stood outside it after midnight, not thinking, and I heard it in there. Lying in the dark. Breathing. I want to tell you about the town itself. I've described specific houses, specific roads, specific incidents across 23 years of living in Harlow Creek. But what I haven't told you, what I've been building toward this entire time, is that it was never just the houses. The town has a quality. I understood this slowly, the way you understand something you've always sensed but never named. Harlow Creek sits in a bowl of low hills, the kind of topography that traps fog in the valleys and makes the nights darker than surrounding areas. Long-term residents don't talk about this. You understand, after enough time, that some things in small towns are maintained by collective silence, and the silence is the only thing keeping them manageable. There was a man who'd lived in Harlow Creek his whole life, 70+ years, lifelong resident, knew everything and everyone. His name was Leonard, and he ran the hardware store on Main for decades. People talked to Leonard. He was the kind of man who listened without judgment and responded without performance. I went to see Leonard in my late 30s, after years of accumulated experience, and I asked him directly what he knew about the town. He listened to me for a long time. Nodded at the right places. Didn't look surprised by anything I said. When I finished, he was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, "You know what a place is, in the old sense. Before towns were towns?" I said I didn't. "A place is somewhere that something already was," he said. "We build on it. We put up houses and roads. We call it ours. But we build on top of something that was already there. Most places, it doesn't matter. The thing underneath is quiet. It doesn't mind." He looked at me. "Some places, it minds." I asked what it was. What the thing underneath was. He thought about this. "Attention," he finally said. "That's the only word I have for it. It's attention. Something that notices. It noticed this place before anything was built here. Before anything human walked through those hills. And it's been noticing ever since. The things you see, the shapes, the sounds, the things that stand in yards and follow you through walls, those aren't separate. They're the same thing, wearing different faces. Noticing you back." I asked if there was any way to stop it. Any way to make it lose interest. Leonard looked at me with something that was almost pity. "It's not interested in you specifically," he said. "You're just here. Everything that stays here long enough gets noticed. That's what the place does. It notices you until you're gone. Some people leave. Some people stay anyway. Some people," he paused. "Some people get noticed so long and so close that it changes something about them." He didn't explain what he meant by that. I didn't ask. I left Harlow Creek for the last time 6 years ago. Sold the last property I had there, loaded what I owned into a truck, and drove away on a clear morning in June. I watched the town shrink in my rearview mirror and felt what I can only describe as a loosening. Like something releasing its grip. I live in a city now. Busy, lit, populated, loud. About as different from Harlow Creek as a place can be. For the first 2 years here, I slept fully through the night for the first time in my adult life. No sounds. No shapes. No feeling of attention resting on the back of my neck in the dark. I thought it was done. I thought distance was enough. I was making coffee at 6 a.m. last spring when I noticed my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I'd been standing at the counter, and behind me, visible in the glass, there was a shape in the far corner of the room. I turned around. Empty kitchen. Full light. Nothing there. I turned back to the window. The reflection was just me. My kitchen. Everything normal. But for the half second before I turned around, the shape in the reflection had been standing the way Leonard described. The way everything in Harlow Creek had always stood. Still. Patient. Paying attention. I've thought about what Leonard said since then. About the town being a place where something already was. About how it notices. About the things that stay too long, noticed so close and so long that something changes about them. I lived in Harlow Creek for 23 years. I don't know what happens to a person after 23 years of being noticed. I don't know what changes in you when something that old, that patient, has been paying attention to you for that long. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet room, I become aware of something. Not outside. Not in the yard or the hallway or under the floor. Inside. Somewhere I can't locate. Looking out. The way you'd expect something to look, if it had finally found its way in after 23 years of patient, quiet, unrelenting attention. And I don't know anymore, when I sit in the dark late at night and feel that awareness, whether I'm the one who's scared. Or whether I'm the one doing the watching. Sleep well.